Hello, hi and welcome once again to The Week Today. My name is Qassim Afzal and as usual we shall be discussing issues that are in the news. We shall be looking at ID cards, Babar Ahmed and extradition. We should be looking at the NHS, the 90 days issue, and if given the time we should look at minorities in Westminster and Kashmir. And as usual I have guests at my programme, and today I have a special guest, a person who's been in Parliament for more than 20 years, originally and formerly was the shadow spokesperson for Home Affairs. And my guest today is Simon Hughes, Member of Parliament and the President for the Liberal Democrats. Welcome, Simon, to cold Manchester, but sunny at the same time.
It's always good.
So what's brought you to Manchester today?
I'm here this week because this is now one of the cities where we've made the most progress as a party. As your viewers will probably know, at the last general election, the Liberal Democrats moved ahead further than ever before in our history. One of the places where we moved greatly ahead was this great city of Manchester, but like many urban areas, in many of our mixed communities, we did very well. John Leach was elected as our first MP in Manchester since before the Second World War. And next year we have very important municipal elections in Manchester. So I'm here to meet many of the communities, to talk about the issues, and to show that Liberal Democrats are ready to take over the administration of this great city, as we have Liverpool down the road and Newcastle and other places around the country. Yeah.
How are the Liberal Democrats reacting to the issue of ID cards? I mean, post 9/11, post 7/7, there's been a lot of new issues regarding terrorist bills, amendments, and the government lost last week their terrorist bill, which they were asking for 90 days. Now, what is the view of the Liberal Democrats on ID cards? People say, yes, we need to be able to differentiate between friend and foe. So what's the way forward?
Let me try and deal with both of the issues in that question. We come from a very straightforward position, which is that if we're going to argue for human rights around the world, then you have to practice them at home. And that's why we as a party consistently opposed pulling out of part of the European Human Rights Convention, which meant that people, not British people, mainly Muslim people, were locked up indefinitely in a prison near London called Belmarsh. We opposed that, and we were right to do that. The senior court in the land decided that Parliament was wrong and the government was wrong. But now the two issues that have come to the fore is how do you respond to terrorism in a way that doesn't make people react adversely, doesn't push people into more extreme activity. You're right, the government last week lost its first ever 2 votes since it was elected in 1997. What were they about? They were about how long people could be detained. The government wanted to be able to hold people without charge, not for 14 days, which we currently do, but for 90 days. We said that was entirely unacceptable. 6 times longer, almost unparalleled in any democratic country. In the end, we, with a coalition of people, led the campaign that it should be no more than 28 days. And that currently is the case. It could come down further, but that was the defeat. On identity cards are not an answer to combating terrorism. They're not an answer to combating crime. Many countries have identity cards, but they're not immune from terrorism or from other crime or from illegal immigration. So we hold firm to our view that it's a foolish and wrong and misguided waste of money to have a hugely complicated identity card system. Much better to have better intelligence, better border control, better policing. We've opposed it. I don't think in the end it will go through, but the legislation is now in our upper house, in the House of Lords, and I hope they will make sure that it doesn't come out the other end with the obligation to have ID cards in this country. People in the minority communities are particularly worried about identity cards because they think they will be used to make life more difficult for them. That's only one of the reasons, but we're absolutely and clearly against it.
Yeah. I mean, the ex-head of MI5, Stella Remington, yesterday made comments as well about the ID card, indicating that who really wants it, why do we need it? But if I can add another question to that, then what's the alternative, Simon? I mean, how do you differentiate friend from foe? There has to be some mechanism put in place for the protection of our country.
Often in this country, as many others, what you need is not new laws, but better management of the system, better administration. We've long argued that for those who would wish us ill from abroad, you have to have proper border controls. You have to have an integrated border force. You have to have good intelligence. For those who would wish us ill from within Britain, British citizens, tragically it appears that the people who carried out the bombing in July were British citizens. That's to do with making sure people don't feel alienated at home. There are debates in Parliament about making sure that you don't allow people to incite hatred against other people by inflaming people to go out and do that sort of activity. Those are the sorts of issues. But if you engage everybody, if you treat everybody equally, if every member of every faith feels they're an equal citizen, then you're much more likely to have a society where people stand together and extremist views, whether of one faith or another, don't gain an upper hand.
I mean, you've touched the point on equality, and many British Muslims feel that there is inequality not only within the UK but globally as well. And currently, which has been in the papers about Babar Ahmed, who was originally arrested, I think kept for 6 days, wasn't charged. He claims on his website that he was actually tortured by British police. And now, without evidence, they have an extradition treaty to get, well, make him leave Britain and go to America. Now, there's two questions here. First of all, how would that feed into the British Muslim community and the wider community on human rights? But secondly, is why should we in Britain, when we claim that we have special relationships with America, have an extradition treaty to send people from Britain, but we couldn't do the same from the US. We couldn't bring over somebody from the US that we felt was needed by the British forces or intelligence.
Qassim, there's a wider question and a narrower question. The wider question is, how do we get equality in this country? And you can never do it just by law, but law and the Constitution can help. We don't have a Bill of Rights in this country, unlike other countries. We don't have a written Constitution because we've had a democracy for so long. But at last, this very week, we're debating in the House of Commons a bill which many of us are pressed for, which would be an equality bill to make for greater equality. It still won't be there. Institutionally, Britain is still a country which has the Christian Protestant Church as its state religion. I happen to be a Christian Protestant, but I don't believe that we should give one faith or one denomination a particular protected status. People of all faiths and none should be equal citizens, and the faith should be equal before the law. On the Babar Ahmed case, it raises a very important issue, and I'm happy to be able to report that we were on, as it were, the right side of the argument as Liberal Democrats. We opposed the ability of another government to ask for extradition from this country for somebody who could be taken to a country where potentially they could face the death penalty. We oppose that people should be able to ask but not give reasons. Sadly, the government, with its majority in the last parliament, got it through. But the Babar Ahmed case, like others, shows the failure of a system that doesn't have equal reciprocity between two countries. Yes, there has to be extradition. Yes, people who commit crimes in country A and are in country B need to be able to be taken back. But there has to be an international justice regime, and there has to be an equity of rights to get a person from one country. So we've opposed that, and it doesn't matter whether it's Babar Ahmed or anybody else. We think the system is flawed, and we will go on seeking to change it.
Slight digression on that. I mean, yesterday the Kurds who were here on asylum, the government has indicated that they may have to go back to Kurdistan because they feel that there's stability there. But if there was stability, then we wouldn't need our armed forces there, wouldn't have the American forces, they wouldn't have the coalition there. So there seems to be, again, double standards here, and I think doesn't feed well amongst the global Muslim community here. I mean, how do you tackle
There's a really important issue. It's not just places like Iraq for the Kurds, but it's people like those who fled from Afghanistan during its time of particular trouble. I'm dealing at the moment with a young Afghan student here whose family were killed by the Taliban, who is terrified of going back. And things aren't entirely settled in Afghanistan. It's not as if the whole country is at peace. We have to have an asylum policy that allows people to continue to stay until their country is safe to go back. Nobody's saying that people could never be able to go back. There are countries that have had civil wars and are now safe. But Iraq is not one of them. I know, as others do, because of the reports we get every day, and we have to be civilized and not be blind to reality. I think British government has become so obsessed about the sense that we have too many immigrants that it's forgetting that ordinary economic migrants are different from asylum seekers and refugees. If people are fleeing because they're not safe, we have a duty to make sure they have a safe haven in a civilized country like ours. Right.
Simon, moving on to something more domestic, again back in the press, back on the news, is the issue related to pensions. Yesterday, as a report made, I think, was it by Turner? I'm not too sure, was it Turner report? Indicated that we may need to, work till we drop dead, basically 67. But there's also a disparity between those from the lower end of the social economic environment and those who were much better off. I mean, those who are much better off tend to live longer, whilst those from the other tend not to. A view from the Liberal Democrats?
Well, we haven't seen the final report yet. It's due out on the 30th of November. But my view, and I sense the way our party will respond, is first we have to accept there will be a later retirement age. 25 years ago, for every one person who was retired, there were 6 people working. Now, for every one person retired, there are 2 people working. So we will have to have a longer working life. And people are living longer. Everybody, of course, differentially according to your wealth and your health and your circumstances. But I accept that we'll have to have a longer working life. Secondly, there is a controversial issue as to whether public sector workers should be able to retire earlier than others.
That's right, yes.
And I don't think you can have a difference of view. However, if people are going to work longer, as I think Adair Turner is going to recommend, there must be a much higher pension. And we are committed as a party to try to deal with the growing inequality in Britain by saying there should be a significantly higher pension, and it shouldn't be dependent on a lifelong contribution record. You should get it as a matter of right.
Just to interject on the issue of pensions then, the pension fund, a lot of people don't trust it anymore. How do you then invest to have a stronger pension fund in the future, which is secured?
Well, again, that's a complicated issue, but very simply, there's a whole set of government and state and local government pension funds which somebody needs to sort out, because otherwise what happens, they're being paid for by the wages and the contributions of today's workers, today's councils, like Manchester City Council. But secondly, the general pension funds, our view is that there should be a basic citizen's pension, and then you should have the right, as the New Zealanders do and others, to pay a top-up, which is then protected and guaranteed and government secured, so that you can put more in, but you know it won't be taken by the employer, who might run off with the money.
If I can move to a slight contradiction here, people are living longer, but yet the NHS yesterday indicated that the average cost for cancer treatment is 25,000, which may have put 100,000 due to the new medicines that are coming in. But once again, only those people who can afford this will be able to get this kind of treatment. I mean, again, we're looking at double standards.
One of the issues in the whole world, in every country of the world, is that although we are all getting relatively richer, the gap is getting greater. Every country, whether it's this country, whether it's the States, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Pakistan, whether it's India, all getting bigger. We've got to deal with that. And one of the ways you deal with it is making sure that you have a health service and an attitude to health that means that people can live healthier lives. So it's about making sure our health service is well funded, but it's about doing the things that reduce the chances of cancer and early death. And that's why in little schools around Britain now, children are being invited to come in early in the morning to have healthy eating, to have fruit for breakfast, to have vegetables, so that we get away from the sorts of things that make them obese and fat and less well and more prone to things like cancer. So it's a whole campaign, but it has a long way to go.
If I can now move more to the, let's say, multicultural communities, many of the parties say that, you know, we've got 39, 40, 41 candidates standing for parliament, and that's what happened in the last election. But yet, a lot of people say that, yes, Labour does have 4 MPs, does have members in the House of Lords, but what are the Liberal Democrats doing? And the Tories don't, I believe, have anybody from the British Muslim community. So what are the Liberal Democrats doing to try to bring some sort of equality within the representation in Parliament?
I think you and other colleagues around the country will know that this is one of my passions and commitments as the person who chairs our party. I am clear that you cannot be a representative party unless you are visibly representative of all the communities. The answer is our recruitment of membership needs to go on recruiting across the communities. We're getting better, but we're not there. But the number of councillors we have from the Muslim and other faith communities is growing, and we need to keep on recruiting and bringing good people to do that job. But secondly, we need to make sure that's visibly the case at Parliament level. Westminster, in Scotland and Wales, and in the European Parliament. We have a very good Muslim European MP. We're the only party to have one, Sajid Karim. But we don't at Westminster. Although we have Muslims in the House of Lords, we don't in the House of Commons. We are now trying to establish new rules to make sure that we have a representative parliamentary party. We've had one go, that didn't find favour with our party. We'll be having another go in the new year. But I know that the chairman of the British Commission for Racial Equality is currently writing to all the major parties to say, what are you doing 40 years after the first anti-discrimination law to make sure Parliament begins to look like Britain? If people are watching who want to be British MPs and qualify because they're British or Commonwealth citizens, and if they're Liberals, then I hope they'll come and see me, because the more we have as applicants, the better the choice.
About 30 seconds left. You were in Kashmir, you had meeting with the President, the Prime Minister. Quickly, a response on your delegation to Pakistan and Kashmir.
Well, I'd like to respond by saying I am absolutely devastated, as colleagues are, that the place we were in earlier this year, Muzaffarabad in Kashmir, has been so terribly affected. And I send huge condolences on behalf of the party. I've also been able to be privileged to help a bit in the fundraising effort here. Excellent. Kashmir will one day be able to exercise its voice for the future it wants. That's our view, and we support that. In the meantime, the world must respond better, because they're not at the moment giving the resources Kashmir and Pakistan need to come out of this tragedy as everybody would wish.
Viewers, that was Simon Hughes, the President for the Liberal Democrats, Member of Parliament. Thank you very much for being on.
Connecting.
Welcome back to the second half of the week today. We're now going to look at education, Islamic books, and the contributions to Western civilization. I have two guests here today with me. The first one on my left is Dr. Saliha Dijzaari. Welcome.
Thank you.
And next to Dr. Saliha is Laman Ball. What's quite interesting is that over the last 2 or 3 decades, there's been a significant change in towards how Muslims have started to, I would say, market or project or educate not only their own young offsprings, but the Western community in regards to the contributions of Islam to Western society. And I'm delighted to bring on my two guests today. It's in relation to this particular book called The Hidden Debt to Islam, to Islamic Civilization. It's a new book that's recently come out, and I have fleeced through it. If I can just read you a small part of it. It says, Western historians in general have removed the Islamic source with regard to every single change that affected science and civilization at the origin of Western civilization and modern civilization. And then each and every one has submitted a number of explanations for such changes within their field of study. This systematic suppression of Islamic source of modern science and civilization has been, however, noted by individual historians who have reconsidered the history of their subjects. Some profound statements there. I'd first like to turn to my guest, the author of this book, and I'd like to ask him that as an historian of the Muslim world, if you can please tell us, how did Islamic civilization change the world today?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Islamic civilization altered fundamentally modern sciences and civilization in every respect, whether you're looking at architecture or arts or sciences, mathematics, history, chemistry, astronomy, all have been affected by Islamic civilization, civilization that rose to the top as far as everything that's concerned today in the period between the 7th and 13th century. That was the time when the Muslims were on top of the world. And from the 12th to the 13th century, the Muslim world started influencing the West. The West at the time was at the other extreme, living in barbarian, backward times. And it was the Muslim world with its sciences and arts and other areas that impacted on the West and brought the West out of that barbaric status. And now we see the West at the other end and the Muslim world on the extreme end. The shift occurred later on, but the period of transfer occurred in 12th, 13th century, where the passage from the Muslim world to the West took place.
I mean, which areas do you think, as far as development is concerned, has been the most significant contribution from Islam in Spain? For instance, I mean, this is where the Muslims, I think, ruled for 600 to 700 years.
Yeah.
And some of the earlier institutes like Santa Lucia, the early universities were set up there. So where have we gone wrong? Where have the Muslims gone wrong?
Well, this will be a bit too long to
Well,
explain.
briefly,
but,
please, yeah.
Briefly, it's not. It's we can explain it in two ways. There is a responsibility by the Muslims themselves. The Muslims were divided and went into war with each other, which invited invasions from other parts, and then we had from these invasions, some of them were completely destructive to the Muslim world, and they took place in the 13th century. The worst of the, in fact, one of them took place before the 13th century, that's the Crusades, but the worst impact of the Crusades was in the 13th century. And then we have the Mongol invasion in the 13th century, and these two invasions completely devastated the Islamic world. After that, we had further invasions, piracy, and colonization, and so on. So Muslim power and strength has been drained over the centuries, from the 13th century until recently, until the 1960s. We've been on the losing path over centuries.
What contributions would you say are significant from the Islamic civilization to science today, and to trade, for instance, to the industrial environment that we live in, the arts, for instance?
Yeah. If we pick some significant aspects of modern civilization, now you look at the importance of the check, for instance.
The check?
The check, yeah. That came from the Muslims. Banks, the first banks, were also in the Muslim world. Remember, before the Muslims brought these innovations, people used to swap goods. They didn't, or if you say, let's say you couldn't trade, because let's say you wanted to trade to go as a trader from France to another part of Europe, you had to carry a big amount of money with all the thieves and so on. You couldn't. Yeah. What the Muslims thought of was the side of the check, whereby you didn't carry any money, you were safe, you go hundreds and thousands of miles away, and you swap a piece of paper which had no value for the thief, but had a value for the trader.
That was your guarantee. I mean,
absolutely.
If I can just bring Laman. Laman, you've read this book, and
yes.
How do you think this book itself will benefit the young Muslims today, British Muslims, and what contribution would it make to the Western community?
There are various important things. I mean, just psychologically, to understand that, you know, the portrayal of Islam as a barbaric, backward religion and so on, which is consistent up to today, and there's all sorts of propaganda which is used for various purposes. To understand this, give you a sense of, that there is some good that the Muslims can do in the world, and they're not just terrorists and backward people.
But that's the way Muslims are seen today. I mean, if you look at Iraq, if you look at Afghanistan, if you look in Pakistan, the terrorism upon Muslims is by Muslims.
Well, yeah. Well, if you have to be careful about saying who's responsible, because lots of it is anonymous. We don't really know who's behind it.
Muslims are becoming synonymous with terrorism, and yet your book here absolutely fantastically reflects the contributions to today's civilization. Bush said, basically made himself and the West look like as the civilized people. Yeah. But according to this book, the premise of Western civilization came from Islam. We need to bring it back. If I can ask you again, Dr. Saliha, how is it possible for historians to actually block out the contributions of Muslims to the world today?
I think you touched upon it with the previous question. The fact is, during the 19th century and a bit earlier on, there was this shift, as I told you. So the West became powerful and started colonizing the Muslim world. However, the colonization was presented not as colonization, but it was presented as civilizing mission. When the Muslim world was colonized, it was said the colonial power presented it to everybody. These are civilizing missions of barbaric Muslims. To be able to justify that, they had to suppress the Islamic contribution to science and civilization, to show the Muslims as barbaric people who needed the civilizing hand of the West. So the politicians did it, but also the academia had to do this. So what they did one thing. They suppressed all the positive from Islamic history, including its impact on the West. They did it gradually. It's a long process between people organizing it. It's still going on at the present. So they suppressed the positive from Islamic history, and they inflated the negative, as they are still doing now. So it's a double process. So the Muslims are victims of losing their positive thing, and by having anything negative coming from the Muslim, turned into the most monstrous thing.
So there was a lot of spin doctors around at the time.
Absolutely.
I mean, if I come back to Laman, what could a person learn from this if they read this book?
The book is packed with fact. I mean, it's a 500 plus page book with some 3,500.
What do you think are the
references.
main points of
the
this
main
book?
points? I mean, there are lots of things you can understand. It goes through the way Islam impacted. It goes through the subject areas it impacted. You know, you can just read one page. Like, for example, there's only like 2 pages on medicine, but you can write volumes on.
So it's a
medicine.
synopsis.
So it's a really it's a gateway into the whole subject area. It's a very substantial. It will be the reference book on the subject, probably.
Well, I must say, I have fleeced through the book, and it's absolutely fantastic book here.
Thank you.
Dr. Saleh, I mean, first, congratulations on writing
Thank you very
this.
much.
A lot of research has gone into this. But if I wanted to get this, where do I get it from?
Well, I think here you've got to ask Brother Malik.
It's being distributed by a number of distributors, including the Islamic Foundation in Leicester and Dar es Salaam Books in London.
Will this be going to schools and libraries as well?
We will be getting it out in any way we can. You can also, if you go to, there's a website called Bayt al-Hikmah, which is the publishing company, is Bayt al-Hikmah Press, baytalhikmah.co.uk, spelled B-A-Y-T-A-L-H-I-K-M-A. And there, any distributor anywhere around the world can order. And
thank you very much. Once again, I'd like to thank you very much for being on The Week today. I'd like to thank my previous guest, Simon Hughes, as well. And the book's worth reading. Recommending it to my viewers over there. And it's got a fantastic title, Hidden Debts to Islamic Civilization. I think it's a must for everyone. Thank you very much for being with me today on The Week today. On The Week today, I hope to see you next week. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.